Okay guys, so for today's video, I am going to cover how to grind a knife with a bevel jig, okay? Today I'm using, this is made by OBM Blade Maker, I think is what it's called. And it's kind of a fancy one. If you don't have one like this, it doesn't really matter, but I'm just gonna show you how I grind a knife with this. If you guys saw my first video I did on this thing, it's a little bit of a learning curve, especially with me only freehand grinding my whole life. To switch to try to do something with a jig was a little different. So I'm gonna kind of cover how I set up the grinder, how I set this up, and go over kind of how to do this to get a nice, clean, crisp bevel, okay? Because it's not just bolted on and go and you've got perfect bevels. There is a little bit of a learning curve. So to start, I've got one of my camp knives bolted in here, okay? And you've got all these different slots to be able to mount your blade to. And as you can see, I'm using one of those front 1/4 inch pinholes to mount it. And then I'm using one of their little guides to set on here. So that way, when I get done with this bevel, I can switch it from this to this. And I've got my other stop right here. So they're identical on both sides, okay? As far as this blade goes, this is 1095 steel. It's already heat treated. And it's about, I think this is 0.187 thickness. It's a little bit of a beefier blade for me. And also I've already got my center line that you guys can't really see scribed in there, okay? That's key. Make sure you scribe the dead center of your blade so you know how far in to take that grind before stopping. As far as the grinder goes, I've got this set up on a 2x72 grinder. And all you need is a flat platen and a work rest, okay? And I'm using my little small work rest here, you can see. I've also got like a really long one that would work great for this, but I don't feel like setting it up right now. So as you can see, like that kind of is your main thing. I'm starting off with a fresh 36 grit Red Label Abrasives belt. And I think that kind of tells you everything. With this knife, and this is gonna vary depending on what knife you guys are grinding and how high up you want your bevel to go, I have this set at about 8 degrees, okay? And you can see on the side there's a little chart to set your bevel. So obviously you need to adjust that for how high or how low you want your bevel to come up, depending on how thin you grind that edge. That's kind of part of it too. The thinner you grind your edge, kind of the higher up your bevel's gonna go. So these bush knives get almost a Scandi grind, but it's a little bit of a higher one to where I take that edge almost to zero right on the grinder before sharpening. So that being said, I'm gonna jump right into grinding it, and I'm gonna kind of start grinding, show you guys how I do it, and I'll probably stop periodically to show you kind of how I correct mistakes or belt changes and stuff like that. One other thing I wanted to cover before I got into this is the way this is set up, you can't set a guide to stop to where your plunge starts. So you always have to be watching where you want your plunge to start at, okay? As far as where you are, like I've got a sharpening choil there on this, and where you want it to start is key, and making it even on both sides, okay? So when I start grinding these with the 36 grit belt, I actually start my plunge a little bit further ahead here. And as I progress with the belts, I cut it back and back and back to where I want it. So that plunge, kind of where I don't know what you call it, but where your plunge starts, it's not like a coarse 36 grit finish. It gets your final 240 grit belt finish or whatever it is, so it looks a little crisper and nice and clean. So that's something you have to watch when doing this, and I see a lot of people mess that up. So watching where your plunge is gonna start and keeping it nice and even the whole way is key to this. So I'm gonna fire up the grinder. Again, let me show you guys something really quick that I'm testing out. This is that Axe Wax, and I'm sure you guys have heard of this, and it's a paste wax that's sold for a lot of culinary knives. It treats handles, and it also prevents rust on high carbon steel blades, stuff like that. I'm trying it out on this knife because this is all satin finished. Let me show you. So my top is technically finished right now. It's kind of, you can see that wax is on there, and you're constantly dunking this in water. So you want to prevent it from rusting. So I'm gonna put a little of that on there and see how it works. All right, so hopefully you guys kind of saw what I was doing. Now you can see here where it's at, okay? It's not perfectly even yet, okay? You can see it's a little in the middle here, it's a little low. And it's looking good though. So that's about as far as I'm gonna take that with the 36 grit on that side, okay? You can see I've got it almost down to my center scribe line. And now I'm gonna pull the blade off and do the other side, okay? And I think there's multiple ways to do this. You could leave it bolted to this the whole time and go all the way up to your final grit in the same position and then switch over and do your other side. But I found that kind of switching the knife back and forth on this, it's time consuming, but you can kind of tweak those bevels better with those finer grits on each side. As far as if one side maybe isn't quite even, you can go back and hit it on the other side. Not sure if that makes any sense, but hopefully it does. So we're gonna switch it to the other side like I told you in the beginning of the video, and try to match this with that 36 grit belt before switching to the other finer grits. All right, so same process. I've got it switched over here. Make sure it's identical. Like I said, make sure you're completely switching and everything's right. And I've got my rest here on this little stud. Okay, the blade's resting on there, bolted to this one. And we're ready to grind the other side down to the same as the one we just did. So I probably won't even show that. I'll just, like I said, I'm looking straight down at it. I'm making sure my plunge is even. Let me see if I can show you guys really quick. Not really. But I'm just making sure that where I'm starting my grind is even, okay? So those plunge lines are perfectly even when it's all said and done, okay? So I'm gonna get this side ground and I'll show you where I stop with a 36 grit belt. And then my belt progression is I go from a 36 to an 80 to a 120, and then probably up to 240 is my game plan with this knife, okay? So I'll show you kind of how I progress with the belts, and then your 36 is your main, hogger, to where with this knife, I'm probably gonna bring it down to about 15 thousandths with that 36 grit belt. If you guys are just doing a normal hunting knife, 20 thousandths is kind of a good final edge thickness, so you might not wanna take it that thin. But just for this knife, that's what I'm gonna do. Okay, so this is a good thing to show for you guys, okay? So here you can see, that doesn't show up very good on this video, but, oh, there we go. Okay, so see how right here, my plunge, I see this all the time, is up high. It comes down and it's almost lower here towards the belly as it comes up. That looks horrible, okay? So the reason why it does that is you're putting a little too much pressure on there when you're starting your grind. And also, if you look at my edge, which you probably won't be able to tell from this video, I've got a little more meat right here than I do right here, okay? So when that starts to happen, stop putting pressure where you're starting and kind of almost start in a little bit and start putting pressure here. It's a lot about really light adjustments on how you're holding that, to where when you're like this and I come in and start there, I'm almost gonna lean it a little this way to try to get that grind more in the belly. And when you're looking right down here like I am, I can see that I've got it's a little thinner right at that plunge when compared to the belly, I guess, is what I'm trying to explain. So that's how you correct that. And I'm gonna do it right now. And I'm almost ready to switch over to an 80 grit belt to kind of start cleaning up those bevels. And you can see my plunge is relatively even. Sorry guys, it doesn't show up super good here, but my plunge is pretty even right now. I've got to go a little further in with the 36, but let's clean this up a little bit. All right, so the 36 grit is done, okay? And this is how it's looking, okay? You can see it's pretty even. I put a lot more pressure here on the belly and it brought it up and evened that out. Our edge is looking good and even the whole way down. Our plunge is pretty even. It looks uneven right there. It's a little uneven, but we're gonna fix that with these finer grits. And I'm leaving the blade where it was to start with that 80 grit, and then you can switch, so you don't have to switch it back and forth a million times, only, 50 times. So as of right now, that axe wax is actually, it's working how it's supposed to. I don't have any rust on the flats yet, and it's looking pretty good. So now what we're gonna do is slow the grinder down. When I do my initial 36 grit, I'm running it wide open. When I start going to those finer grits, I slow it down. So right now I'm gonna go to about 60% power on the VFD. If you guys are running a single speed or something like that, maybe just take your time and use real light pressure. Those finer grit belts just burn up really fast, and you can burn your edge of the blade. So that's why a VFD is super, super important. But anyways, I'm gonna jump right in here and kind of do the same thing. We're doing real light passes. One thing that's kind of important is make sure that when you go to kind of set your jig down, that it moves freely, okay? If it starts catching, it messes up the grind. So make sure, like I put a little of that axe wax right here and on this base, and it's working pretty good. You can see it smooths, it's nice and smooth, okay? That's key here. So let's fire this up and get this 80 grit belt done. All right, so I'm switching sides right now. I'm going to the other side that hasn't hit the 80 yet. So let me show you where the 80 grit's at right there. You can see it's pretty even. That bevel is even the whole way across and up. And like I said, just pay attention and go slow and apply pressure in different areas. That seems to be key to this. You can see here's my 36 grit side still, and here's my 80, okay? And you can see how I brought my plunge back. Man, it just doesn't show up very good. Sorry, guys. But you can see how this side has my plunge brought back a little bit with that 80 grit. And now I'm going to even that up with the other side 80 grit, okay? And then probably I'll even bring it back a little bit further because I want it to start just a little bit further back on that sharpening choil to give me plenty of room to sharpen that blade all the way back. So 80 grit still, going to hit this other side at 80. And then just kind of keep doing the same thing. I guess the higher grit you go, the lighter the passes and the less passes you do. After 80, the 120 grit, I'm just going really just evening out those grind lines and just barely tweaking your plunge and make sure it's good and even, okay? So let's do that right now. All right, so hopefully I'm explaining this somewhat to where you guys are following. If so, make sure you subscribe to the channel. So I've got, right now I'm at 120 grit on this side, okay? And it is, let's get you really close. It's a little high there. Then it comes across and it's pretty good. And you can see that I've got my plunge, dang it, just back a little further on this side than I do this side right now. And here's my 80 grit side. Now, the problem right here is you can see this side is higher. Maybe you guys will be able to see that. Maybe, I don't know, a 32nd of an inch higher the whole bevel is, okay? So I popped this off. I was gonna switch to this other side to do the 120, but I'm actually gonna put it back on the side I just finished with the 120 and bring it up a little higher to try to match this side, okay, before I switch it over. And that's why I said in the beginning, switching back and forth on the jig as opposed to just going all the way through the belts seems to work for me, I guess is the way to put it. So that's what I'm gonna do right now, try to get this thing as even as possible. And you can see like where my tip is, okay? See how high up the tip is right there? And then when I switch it, you can see it's down a little bit. Maybe you'll see it better this way. It's higher on this side, lower on this side. So I'm gonna try to fix that with that 120 grit belt before hitting the other side with a 120. So something that I think would help, and it would help me as well, if you laid down some of that bluing or whatever and scribed in where you want your plunges to be and made sure it was even on both sides, so you could really pay close attention at how high everything is as you progress through those grits. That would probably help a ton. I don't do it. I don't know why, but I probably should. And so there you go. We got it pretty close. This side right here comes up just a little bit higher towards the tip than this side. So we're gonna adjust that. And I guess it's really hard to explain, but how I do that is I put pressure kind of on a different spot on that. Like if you hold it by the handles, you're kind of pushing up on it. And if you want to adjust the spot, maybe push down, kink it a little bit. Obviously I'm exaggerating it, but that's how you kind of adjust those fine details using a jig. So there is still quite a bit of practice that is involved in using these jigs. It's not just bolt the knife on and you've got perfect bevels. That's kind of what I wanted to cover in this video. Is a lot of people hate on using jigs, and I don't personally use them for 99% of my knives that I do, but they take skill to use properly, and the end result can be almost perfect, which if that's the kind of knife you want to make, then hopefully you guys are learning something from this video. So I'm gonna go ahead and switch it, finish the 120 on this side, not bore you guys with it, go up to the 240 grit, same exact thing, real slow, even passes and making sure everything's really even. And then I will probably show you guys the end result here in a few minutes. All right, guys. So I just finished up with, I think that's a 220 grit belt, and I've got everything super even. I'm gonna pull it off of here. And I use these little T Allen heads that just makes things a little faster. So that whole process took me about 45 minutes, okay? And that's with filming this and doing all this stuff. So that was one thing I wanted to kind of talk about, is it takes a long time to grind a knife using a jig, okay? It's like I can freehand grind a knife about 5 times as fast. But the results you get from using a jig are as close to a machine done knife as you can get. So like I said, if that's your style, that's awesome. And it's not really my style. I like it when there's a couple little funny things that I can pick out on a knife and say, well, I kind of messed that up, but kind of gives stuff a little bit of character. So to start off, that axe wax did a really good job at preventing this thing from rusting while I was dipping it and stuff like that. So that was a good test, and it worked out pretty good. So secondly, let me clean that off a little bit. Here's our final bevel. Sorry, there's some of that wax is on there, so it looks a little funny. Oh, and super good and even. You can see maybe, let's see. And this is why if you had that scribe line, you could see I might have to pop it back on and bring this side up just a little bit, but very a minuscule amount. And there you go. So there's one of my camp knives, fully ground, ready for handles. And oh, let's see if I can show you the plunge. Nice and even. Man, my hands I think are making it to where stuff isn't showing up good on the camera, but that plunge is nice and even. The other thing I wanted to mention before I go is when you're stepping up to the grinder, whatever side you're grinding when it's in the jig, make sure that your belt overlap where it hangs off the side of your platen is the same on each side. So when you go to grind your plunge on this side, make sure your belt overlap is the same as when you did it on this side. Because if you leave a little overhang, it'll give you kind of a softer plunge where this transitions. And if you leave it to where there isn't any overhang on the belt, it gives you kind of more of that kind of a tighter up and over kind of thing. So you can see they're good and even because I did that on both sides. So if you want it to be more of a swoop where this is, then just leave a little more belt overhang, okay, when you go to do it. So that's another little tip, trick, whatever you want to call it. So there you go, the Origin Blade Maker bevel jig. I'll try to put a link below for this thing, $100, something like that, 120 bucks, I think, I don't remember. But it works really well. And I wanted to do kind of a follow-up video to the first time I used it because I was pretty skeptical and I didn't love it. But now that I've used it, I've learned it a little bit. The thing is super awesome, gives you great results. Just takes a little practice. So that being said, guys, if you have any questions about what I did today, I tried to cover everything that I was thinking about in my head, but I always forget stuff. So make sure you drop it in the comments. I'll answer every question you guys have. And also, if you have anything else you want me to cover in future videos, make sure you drop it in the comments below as well, and I'll try to cover everything as fast as I can. So like always, guys, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and thanks for watching.